Is here. We are joined by Sam Delesque from Traditional Dream Factory. Really excited to be learning from him about what it is to bridge your land-based project on chain, what experiences he's had, and kind of what learnings that he can maybe share with us and impart some wisdom upon us from his experiences. So, Sam, please go ahead and introduce yourself and take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much. So yeah, my name is Sam. I'm a co-founder of an experiment in building a regenerative way of life. Our prototype is called Traditional Dream Factory in Portugal. But it's part of a broader vision where we're aiming to build a network of spaces. And in the pursuit, we've been building technology because we believe in making it much simpler to do these projects through tech and decentralizing the access and governance rights through technology. I'd actually maybe just love to get a little bit of a feel for what you guys are looking to get out of this workshop, because I mean I can kind of tailor it to wherever it needs to go. Like I was just presenting this morning at another network state event here in Lisbon, and that was like really focused on like village builders and developers. So I don't know, like in the room, if you can just maybe quickly also just like share in the chat, like, yeah, how much you want, like how deep you want to dive basically, and which kind of areas are most interesting to you. Um, So yeah, maybe we can just pop it in the chat. I think that might make it easier. And then meanwhile, I can continue chatting a little bit about the history of the what we're doing. But yeah, so basically, I mean, we've been active for the last 4 years, building the space in Portugal. We basically selected a location that had 1,500 square meters of existing building um, that we could basically convert into and develop, along with a 25-hectare property. So 25 hectares, like 65 acres or something for those that are more on the American side. And it includes basically a bunch of buildable land as well as a mill and a river and some farmhouses and so on. And the intention is really to create kind of a playground and a prototype for building a regenerative way of life. And so it's mixing co-living development, which is geared towards like short to medium-term stays, as well as a regenerative farm, like agroforestry based, and as well as a co-housing development with a tiny home neighborhood and like a full-size neighborhood. All right, so we check the chat. Main lessons learned and anticipated problems encountered, challenges in building the space, how to use Web3 to create, coordinate a harmonic and pro-evolutionary alignment between the members of a new community. Love it. And legal hurdles. Okay. Well, I think I will just run through the full presentation I have. I'll try not to spend too much time on all the technical details because it's probably a bit in depth. And then we can spend a bit more time at the end talking more about experiences and challenges and making it a bit more interactive. So this window. All right, Marcelo. Yes, you're muted. You're muted.
Okay. No, sorry to interrupt. I just want to ask you guys if you're using some AI assistant to record and make a summary of the presentation that can be shared later with other folks.
Yeah, that's a great question.
AI, shall we add it?
I can add Fatum, but if you guys have one of your preference, please do it, because I feel it's very valuable for us that cannot stay during the whole event, or maybe we want to share with some folks that are interested but weren't able to attend at this time.
Yeah, that's a great question, Marcel. We always record all our events, and then we put it up on the YouTube within a day or two afterwards to make it available for everybody. And then we also do like a general kind of overview post on our Twitter account and share the links there as well. We haven't utilized like an AI summary sort of software previously. Is there one that you recommend?
I'm using this Fathom.
There's Read AI that can be admitted to the meeting if you want to. That's the one I use, and it's like generally very good summaries.
So go. You can go with yours, Sam.
Well, now I don't see how to add them with waiting room. I don't see it anymore here, so maybe feel free to add yours. And maybe I'll just get started in the meantime.
Second.
But yeah, so I mean, well, in this today I wanted to just basically chat about more like how do we scale this up? How do we create a network of these Earth positive living spaces? And so I'm going to be talking more from the perspective of the platforms that we created. So in the process of establishing Traditional Dream Factory, we've been also building out the tech that can enable a decentralized access and governance. We basically started about 2 years ago when we hosted an event on using crypto for this kind of crypto and DAOs for this type of villages. All right. And basically from there, we like a few months later, we came out with a white paper. You can find the OASA white paper on our website. You'll find it on traditionaldreamfactory.com, and there'll be some links there. And essentially, I mean, this platform is how we can manifest in the digital realm the ideas that are described in the white paper, and it's a way that we can replicate and scale up innovation that's been put into it. So at the bottom line of what we're trying to do is regenerating land, regenerating ecosystems that have been degraded over the last few centuries. And so what do we mean by regeneration? Regeneration simply means a capacity to hold more life. It's more quantity of life, more quality of life, and more diversity of life. Basically, our civilization has been degenerative up until now. Like the more technology we do, the more economic growth we have, the more we're depleting our soil, the more we're killing our biodiversity, and so on and so on. So we have a lot of negative externalities, and what we want to get to is building a solar punk civilization that actually leaves a positive trace on nature, that has a symbiotic relationship to nature. And we want to step back into a role as keystone species, as a human organism. And so one of the topics that's come out in like the crypto space over the last few years and in the regen space is this idea of building a nature-backed economy. Charles Eisenstein talks about it, and it's this idea that if we can back our economy with nature, so with the growth of nature, with the capacity to create more life, then we will tend to make more of that. And so instead of backing our economy with, for example, corporate debt and internal growth and the military industrial complex, what if we could actually start to monitor changes to nature, to land, and start to punish bad actors and reward good actors? And that's becoming possible because we have more and more data available. We have satellite data that's becoming so granular that we can actually like give you a count of species that are interacting with your land based on spectral images and so on. We also, for example, can see big polluters. You have methane emission tracking satellites and these kind of things. And we also have more and more capacity to generate intelligence based on all of this data, thanks to AI and these kind of systems. So what's been emerging in the crypto space over the last few years is this idea of refi, regenerative finance. And so it's, yeah, looking at how can we actually encode our like economic structures so that they can leave a positive impact on the planet. And the main things that we have been kind of looking at is generally real estate developments has been detrimental to the planet. We and also same with agriculture or any form of like private property in general. We tend to take a piece of land and we extract value from it. Basically, we're borrowing from future generations when we do that. And at its base, like this right of ownership comes from Latin law, and it's a right to use, a right to get the fruit of, and the right to destroy. And that applied to any form of things that you own, whether it was material objects or land or even humans back when we had slaves. And this mentality of like being able to extract and consume the world around us is something that's really deeply rooted in our Western civilization. But if you start to look at indigenous tribes around the world, the ways that they interact with the environment is a sense of stewardship, and stewardship is the right to care for and the right to get the fruit of. And so that's a little bit what we're trying to get into with in building this platform. We're trying to transform real estate from a destructive industry into a regenerative one. What if instead of having to chop down native forest and pouring tons of concrete to create little units that we can then sell to consumers, what if we could see real estate as a force for good, as like transforming the biggest market in the world into actually something that can power conservation and regeneration of land? And what if we could encode indigenous values into exponential tech? Like today we have AI and emerging and all of these systems and technologies. And I think there's a big need for these life positive values to be encoded into this technology as it takes an exponential curve. And so just like a little background on like, what do we then mean by that? So generally when you're starting a village, when you're launching your land-based DAO or whatever you want to call it, this is kind of generally the process. You have a team of founders that find a land and do a concept, and then they need to get the money. So they go to investors, they sell some equity, or they get some bonds, or they maybe get a mortgage, or maybe they sell some token futures, and also grant funding. But then basically progressively, that village or that habitat needs to start to be inhabited by the people that will be living in it. And so little by little, you can have an exit to community, an exit to the commons. And this is basically where we come in, and the piece of tech that we are bringing is enabling you to issue a token that represent access and governance right to that specific piece of real estate. And basically, as the buyers of these tokens are locking up the value into the network, that means that the debt on that land is slowly paid off, and the land eventually owns itself. It can sit in a nonprofit entity, whether it's a land trust or a nonprofit, whatever you want. And then you can basically handle the access and the governance through a digital platform, which is what we're building. We like to see it as kind of these three layers. At the bottom, we always have nature. Wherever we are on this planet, whatever home you are in, like underpinning everything, we need to be in symbiosis with nature, because if we're degrading our water systems, extracting too much from the water table that the water cannot replenish, we're gonna have problems in the near future, and we're kind of at the end of this curve where we cannot just continue extracting, simply because there's just too many humans and we've been too proficient at extracting from nature. So nature doesn't have the time to replenish itself, and if we don't change drastically the ways that we're interacting with nature within a generation, we're not going to have the capacity to feed ourselves or to have clean water or clean air to live from. So any kind of development that we do, by default, they need to be nature positive. And that's something that we want and that we can measure now. Like I mentioned before, you have more and more data streams that are available through satellite, but also sensors and drones and all kind of ways that you can collect data. Also, just with people on the ground with their phones, that data is becoming super prevalent, and we're able to process it and to make sense of it. One way that we're doing it, for example, is through Open Forest Protocol. Open Forest Protocol is a decentralized monitoring and reporting network for tracking the growth of a forest. And through it, basically, we can know how many tons of carbon we're sequestrating in the forest that we're growing. Biodiversity is another metric that is becoming more and more available. And you have protocols like Simplex DNA, for example, that by taking a sample from a body of water on your land, you're actually able to get an inference of all the species that have interacted with your land. And through that, I mean that we can also start to monitor it and see like if the project's actually having a positive effect on biodiversity and carbon sequestration and all these things, or if it's negative. And then of course, like this, yeah, all the other kind of metrics that we want to track. It's not all about carbon. The carbon is one market that is already developed, that you can already create an asset, and that's why it's been kind of one of the main pillars for regenerative finance. But a lot of people are starting to align on something called the ecological benefits framework, which looks at air, biodiversity, carbon, local equity, and so on. And we can kind of take a look at those different areas. And I believe that villages or regenerative settlements can basically have a positive effect on a lot of those. We can enhance our soils through practicing regenerative agriculture. We can retain and store more water in the land instead of depleting the aquifers. We can create steward ownership by having this token that actually changes the right and the type of interaction that you can have with the land. And we can monitor and the carbon that we're sequestrating through our forestry efforts and tracking the biodiversity increases. Then the second layer that we have on top of our nature is all the housing and infrastructure in your village or land-based DAO. So obviously you want to have like low footprint construction, like trying to use materials that aren't so detrimental to the health of the planet. But you also want to create a whole ecosystem that can generate an internal economy so that you don't have to only rely on, for example, housing, but actually having thriving entrepreneurs and startups and food production and just creating the conditions for for living in general, especially in rural areas. Like we want to have access to kind of all these infrastructures that we're used to in cities. I'm just checking the questions meanwhile. I'll take those at the end. So essentially what we're doing is we're building a token economy that sits on top of a real economy. And that's a little bit different from how tokens generally work. And basically we're trying to encapsulate this regenerative economy on the scale of a village, where you have certain inputs and outputs, and you have housing, and you have food, and you have water, and you have all these different things. And what we tokenized is a time-based access to that space. This is a little map of what TDF looks like, for example. So you can see on the right here, we have like a few different areas. So we have our co-living space with 1,500 square meters of existing buildings that we're converting, which also has a maker space and a co-working area and industrial kitchen. Then we have a whole street basically that we can develop and putting more houses for people that want to actually live there maybe more full time. And we have a farmhouse, and we're going to be setting up a tiny home neighborhood somewhere around. And we're also building this water retention landscape. You can see the different lakes and so on. And in our kind of main area, we have the co-living, co-working event space, makerspace workshop, cafe, and a big pool and a mushroom farm and sauna and some other stuff. But so once we have all of these assets that are now like healthy land, with like infrastructure that can empower creative humans and having a high quality of life, then how do we actually coordinate around accessing and governing those lands? And how can we improve the game so we don't get stuck in all of the pitfalls that we can have with like humans coordinating around anything really? So we kind of took the Web3 approach to doing this. So we looked at, okay, what is the innovation that's been happening in the realm of DAOs over the last several years, and what would need to happen for this to be applicable to land-based projects, and what is actually relevant. And we found that the thing that probably makes the most sense to track is how much time people spend in the project. And because we're building the booking system, and because you're booking through the token that we are issuing, that means that we actually know how many days you spend every year in the space. And so we have this primitive, which is called proof of presence, which is basically just an indicator of how much time you spent in a project. And now that can become a primitive in your governance stack and being able to make decisions based on that, rather than simply being one member, one vote, or one share, one vote, like you would have in a more traditional system. And we also have a couple of other primitives. So proof of sweat, which is basically just how much work you put into the project over the years, and obviously the token itself, which is more of your financial stake and like how many future rights of stake you have, so that you can actually come and live in this project in the future. And so all of those can be combined into your own kind of governance stack. You can give them each like their own voting weights and so on. And it's a bit of a different from like, say, a democracy where you have either you're a citizen or you're not. Like if you're a citizen of the United States, you can vote in the United States when there's a presidential election. But democratic systems are very binary. It's like either you're a citizen or you're not. And it's not really representative. And like, I mean, we've seen a lot of pitfalls with a political system all over the world, and more polarization happening, and less like real decision making happening, because we're not really empowered to make decisions in a local context and giving that authority to the relevant people. Whereas in this case, basically, you get voting power based on how much time you spend in the space, how much work did you put into it, and how many rights do you hold in that space. So imagining if you're spending 1 month in Bali and then 3 months in Portugal and 3 months in Scandinavia, you can kind of split your voting and your influence across those 3 spaces, because it's where you're spending your actual time. Just briefly, the legal structure looks something like this. You have your land title, which is owned by an SPV, a local company. This local company is quite important because that's the one that handles all the relationships to the local country where you're based. But now this local company, in our case, is owned by a Swiss association. The Swiss association recognizes a DAO, and that means that we have a direct legal mapping all the way from our token and our governance model all the way down to the land title. And basically, by having this Swiss association, that means that we can ensure that the assets are put into the commons, that they're protected under certain principles. And by holding tokens in the DAO and by participating in the local economy, you actually get to decide what happens at the scale of the local company and at the land title and so on. Okay, I see a lot of questions, but then maybe for after, I think I'll go through them after. So our token model is very simple. It's 1 token is 1 night per year forever, which means that it holds a value. It's quite easy to understand, and when you look at the economics of the project, it's quite easy to calculate. You take the total cost of development and you divide it by how many nights will be available in a year. And that gives you the total number of tokens. Yeah, I don't know if I should talk too much more about it, but essentially what the token gives you is access to housing. But if you see it also as a stewardship token, really what it gives you access to is a conservation area that is also going to have healthy forests around with fresh food and fresh water and biodiversity, and also it sits on top of this whole local economy with micro businesses. And you, like in our case, for example, we produced a book, but we also are producing Blue Lotus kombucha, and we have like a hot sauce brand, and all these other like products that we can export from the village. And all these products basically increase the total revenue that is available for the operational entity and for the DAO. And that is also something that you get access to through the token. So like I said, the initial token price is basically the total product cost divided by the total number of nights available every year based on the number of accumulations that you're building. And then we put it on a bonding curve so that for every token sold, the price increases a little bit, which means that we're building up a bit of a buffer and a reserve so that by the end of the project, we're going to have a bit of extra funds to do more stuff with, or maybe construction prices will increase, and that will have, then we'll be able to cover that with a buffer. Yeah, I talked already about the primitives. We also have a layer of membership, basically, in order to like we made it so that the token could be purchasable by anyone, but in order to use it, you still have to get approved by the team on the ground. So either by submitting a request, or you can become a member, which means that you get vouched by the community. We know that you're adhering to the values of the project, and therefore you can make the project one of your homes, and you're able to just book instantly as long as it's available. Okay, maybe I'll take a couple of questions while I'm here. So there's a question about security. So we are a utility token. We've been approved by the Swiss government. However, we do not deal with American citizens. So at this point, for this token, for the TDF token, we kind of only, well, we cover the rest of the world basically, except for the US, because the US has like specific rules. And if you hit, I think, 200 US citizen in your token holders, and they could basically technically pull you in and start to regulate you in the US. And just because of how fickle they've been at recognizing crypto projects, we prefer to stay out of it. But there is like MiCA regulations and so on for Europe now, which means that that is something that we could comply with and basically have a legal token for Europe, which, yeah. So yeah, so I mean, if you're doing stuff in the US, I think, yeah, I mean, you would have to dive into it. Like I haven't looked personally in the, like I've just not been that deep into the US market recently. But I mean, basically the technologies that we built, you could leverage it. And I think you just have to find a legal wrap and an entity that would work for you. I know that some people, like, for example, Church 503C in the US is much easier to set up than in spaces like Europe, and you can get quite a lot of flexibility around it. So you'd have to structure basically your token based on the specific needs of the US market. This is our governance process. I don't think it's going to be very foreign for you. Some public forums, some chambers for the members, and then public voting in Snapshot. Our current product basically covers ticketing and events, community management, subscriptions, selling tokens, being able to then use that token to make a booking, and then eventually collecting proof presence, which we can use for governance. We kind of built into the platform like a lot of the stuff that villagers tend to need, like maybe it's a fundraising page, like educational center. We can post like educational videos and content, but also a blog and being able to have volunteers, and yeah, all this kind of stuff. This is a little bit like the type of communities that we want to cater to and the kind of market. We have 4 communities already deployed on Closer, and there's a bunch of land-based projects that are kind of considering the option of tokenizing. And then there's also like Web3 communities. We haven't really been so active in that space recently, but that are looking for basically acquiring land and yeah, being in that intersection. All right. Yeah, and basically, I mean, the idea of Closer is to build a common infrastructure, so a tech platform that can be put into the commons, that can be shared across all of these different projects. Basically for now, we had like an initial cohort of projects that we've been working with and like building out all the features. And the goal for next year is to make it super scalable and to just make it super easy for anyone to just deploy the platform. And yeah, we're looking for a bit of investment to basically build it out further and also streamline some of the tech, for example, being able to do account abstraction and really make it super easy for even like dummy users that don't really need to or want to learn about Web3 necessarily. So those are some of the upgrades that are coming. And then the idea is to make the model scalable, to have a bunch of ground projects that can basically coordinate around, first of all, showing that there are alternatives so that you can go up the ladder and start to talk to institutions and showing, okay, like we're building this new kind of class of spaces that are actually leaving a positive trace on the land. You can funnel funding through that way. But also in itself, we're creating real estate assets that are very attractive and that can respond better to the needs of modern citizens, like digital nomads or whatever, that don't really want to have the commitment of a 30-year mortgage, but they want to have access to beautiful spaces in nature with access to internet and access to makerspaces, you name it. Yeah, and I think I'll just kind of end it there and start to look a little bit at all the questions.
And then maybe Sam, if you're comfortable, we could probably just kind of allow people to even unmute themselves and ask questions live if that works for you.
Oh yeah, please.
All right, let me make sure the settings are up for that. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, we'll also go through the chat here and kind of I can share those questions with Sam, but also in the meantime, feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself and ask any questions live as well.
And maybe I can just start off by answering some of the first questions, like around lessons and challenges and stuff like that. So yeah, basically the history, I mean, we started this like 2 years ago. We started doing private sales, a year and a half ago, and then a year ago we launched our token. The initial idea was to fund the entirety of the project through a token sale. That didn't really work out, and that was both like the timing of the market and all of that. And also the fact that this is a very novel concept and very pioneering, and we are the only land-based project that I know of in the world where you can actually buy a token and actually come and stay. So yeah, we need to create a lot of education around it, and right now we're kind of in the process of finding those initial early adopters, like the first spaces that are really going to launch this into the world. But I think we've been learning a lot and getting the tech better and better, basically, over the time. And also what we've learned is, well, real estate is the most capital intensive, well, one of the most capital intensive activities that you can do. It just costs a lot to build houses, and real estate is the biggest market in the world. It's highly valued, and everyone kind of understands it. It's a very traditional market as well. So coming in with all this like very modern tech on top of it is a little bit difficult. However, what we've been doing at TDF is basically bridging to have traditional construction loans that are issued by the local company, and then having the token more as a long-term exit to community strategy. So you can have people buying into the model, purchasing tokens over time, who basically acquire the access right and the governance right over the project over time, without necessarily having to upfront like the big capital expenses that are needed to do the development. And so basically we've now combined like real estate construction loans that are backed by the assets. So it's very secured for the investors. They get their fixed interest. We don't give them any equity. So basically the project is fully sovereign, and we're able to retain all the decision making, and the DAO is basically fully able to maintain its sovereignty as long as it's able to make those payments over time. And as a user, as a token holder, I'm able to come in and just buy my tokens over time and slowly building trust in these new forms of real estate ownership. Yeah, so that was definitely one challenge. Another challenge, I guess, is just human coordination. We kind of grown through multiple iteration of our governance stack. So I mean, at first we were very much like duocracy, like more like Burning Man style camp inspired of just people doing the things on the ground and being empowered to do what they like, empowering the doers to do the things that they do. And then we kind of scaled up to being a fully sociocratic organization, having 25 contributors and a DAO and everything. And if it became a bit too big and a bit unmanageable, or we were basically losing a bit too much energy, so we had to scale it back down to having more like full-time team members. And so the current structure is that we have, and we also basically went through a process of discovering a little bit what are the power dynamic in this kind of project, and separating out between the executive power, the legislative power, and the constitutional power. So in our case, basically you have the executive team, which is in charge of taking the current master plan, the current vision for the project, building it out, being the main stakeholder to talk with the contractors, with the architect, with engineers, with the city, and so on and so on. You have a lot of on the ground stuff to do when you're a real estate developer. But then you have the legislative body, which is the DAO, which basically decides on changing the rules of the game. What is a vision? What is a master plan that we're actually coming together? So for like big decisions on how the project evolves, all the participants in the economy can have a voice. But for the execution, it like goes to the team. And then finally you have the constitutional level, which in our case includes, for example, the regenerative land stewardship principles, which is something that is not up to the participants to decide, but it's more something that really, like, it's meant to be as immutable as possible, basically. So it's designed to be hard to change. Gardner.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry. I'm driving and I'm trying to maintain some semblance of safety at the same time. First of all, just wanted to publicly give you praise for this endeavor and this presentation as well, that so concisely and poignantly explains what you have done. I've been looking to do something like this in California on the West Coast for some time. And this is really heartening to see that you've been able to do this over time. So number one, thank you for being here and for helping to regenerate land and bring people together to enjoy that land for generations. First question is around the templatizing of something like this. And again, sorry, I'm driving, so I wasn't able to see a lot of the slides and the details. But what and how are you trying to scale up to replicate this around the world?
Yeah, so basically we have like a 3-entity approach to it, where each entity is like scalable to its own extent. So the first entity is traditional Dream Factory. That's like our prototype. It's an actual land in Portugal. It has its own company. It has its own asset. It has its own list of members, its own token, its own governance model. So it's kind of a self-sufficient little community. But this asset is also part of a broader network. The broader network is called OASA. And OASA basically just serves the purpose of enforcing regenerative land stewardship principles on the land, as well as enforcing a decentralized access and governance of that land. So OASA kind of serves as a Web3 land trust. And so the purpose of OASA is to acquire and conserve more lands, and the goal is to scale up to like 100,000 hectares globally, spread across like 10 to 15 projects. So basically the land trust itself is scalable. TDF is also scalable in that it can build more housing and kind of build out as a little village of its own. And then the third piece is Closer, which I was mainly presenting here, which is a technology, and that's pretty much infinitely scalable. Like we already have 4 communities that are using it. Like I said, the goal is to make it so that by next year, anyone can just go to the Closer website and launch a village, and we support them through the process of, well, like launching a token, like helping them to do basically the operation of a real estate asset, but as a regenerative community where you are actually like co-owning and sharing this asset rather than having a more like market-based approach to it. So yeah, so basically the tech is infinitely scalable. We can have an infinite number of communities adopting it and starting to use it. And also the tech is designed so that it's meant to also go at least partially into the commons, where all of the projects that basically end up implementing it, they pay a usage fee, like it's a transaction fee on a transaction that goes through the platform. But eventually we also want to reward them with a token that decides the future of the platform itself.
Amazing. And how long did it take for you? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go for it.
All right. Okay. How long did it take for you to build like a cohort of full-time members that wanted to participate in this? How many? I think I had heard that 25 was too large for managing. What was the amount of like full-time versus part-time that you had working on this project over time? What was that timeline like?
Yes, I mean, well, I think we're talking about different things. Like we have all members. We have 60 members currently. So those are people that are invested in the project. There's a requirement to hold a 30 TDF token to become a member. But our members are more like the people who see TDF as one of their homes. I think you're asking more about like the team. Basically now we are at 6 full-time people like in the land, plus all the supporting roles, the architects, the engineers, all that other stuff. And yeah, and then we also have like there's different scales of participation in terms of how much time you commit. Basically, we have the full-time team. We need to have a few people who are really there and who can hold the vision in terms of developing the land. Like we're doing a 25-hectare agroforestry development and water systems and lakes and all of that. So you need to have a bit of continuity in building that.
Yep.
Then I think there's like more like operational type roles. So like, more like a community manager, cleaning the spaces, taking care of that. That's something that we eventually want to be able to package into, like an operational company that kind of just handles that for the project. And that's like very clearly defined with like cleanings and just providing a consistent service to the members when they come and check in. Yeah, and then currently, I mean, there's a whole like construction aspect, which is obviously very important. And so yeah, so we have like we both have an area of like self-build, like a lot of stuff that we're doing ourselves, as well as having professional contractors that are doing like the larger scale developments. And
Wow.
you were asking
I did have one last question. I don't want to take up all the time for others that have questions, but hopefully this covers perhaps some other questions that other people have in terms of just capital allocation as well. What is the range that you had to start with in order to really get this project off the ground? Like land purchase aside, because obviously that's going to range, and then of course the different ambition you have for the physical structures obviously is a range as well. But like, what was like the MVP for the structures that you felt like were absolutely necessary to build, and what was the amount that you kind of felt that you had to raise in order to get that first couple structures off the ground?
Sure. I mean, yeah, I think there's like many different MVPs basically. I mean, we are like kind of the intersection of many things. I'll start with the cost that we kind of incurred in like building this as a scalable model, which are not necessarily going to be applying to you because hopefully you can leverage some of the things that we've done. But so we spent about 150K on like software development, for example, which has all been funded through grants. So Yeah, that is like one thing, which is a bit separate. And basically now the startup cost, if you wanted to launch a token and so on, basically we brought it down to like less than 10K, which is like hiring a few Web3 developers to kind of work out some of your token dynamics and so on. And the legal expenses, I mean, we spent somewhere around like $100,000 on legal. But hopefully for the next project, it might be more in the range of like 10K as well, for this kind of project. So those are more like the digital cost. And then I mean for the land itself, I was lucky enough to find a property that was not being valued much in the market at the time. So 200,000 euros back then, for all the buildings, and then we basically had the option to purchase the rest of the land, and we kept some agreements on the rest of the 25 hectares. And I think what is it? I think we had about 600,000 invested in total, for the things that we've done up to now, and basically now we're up to 1 million invested in the project in total. But most of that is for the construction that is coming up soon. And so yeah, so like let's say maybe 300,000 or so was what we spent. But I mean, it's really hard to say like what it takes to do an MVP, because we had our first event in September 2021 with 120 people on the land, and we really did it like Burning Man style. Like we built compost toilets, we built showers, we built all of this stuff, and that was our MVP. Like we were able to host 120 people, and they had a great time. And it wasn't like luxury accommodation, but this was like a way to get started. And like since then, we've kind of been leveraging that infrastructure, making things a bit better over time, but also just like doing the water retention landscape, planting the trees, like doing the regeneration, like these things take time, and that's something that takes a lot of like time and like investment, especially. Like it's not so much the financial side, but like if you are trying to restore a whole area, like that's going to take a lot of time and effort. Okay, I see a lot of questions coming in, so let me check.
I think Marcelo had a great one about the governance model in which you propose. Says, I have heard of many eco-village initiatives that fail to move forward or have dissolved because of conflicts that arise from unaligned interests and preferences. There are also cases of problematic members who create turbulence and destabilizes the community. How can the governance model you propose prevent this from happening, or how can it exclude members who are disrupting the space or the community?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I think first of all, what we're providing is an open model that you can see, and you can see the rules, you can see how the game is played before you decide to join. And that's already a big improvement compared to most eco villages, which might not even have a governance model, which don't really have an easy way to enter the cap table or to exit it. And so by tokenizing it, you're basically making it much easier to exit, like to do what's called a rage quit in Web3 world. So like if you start to disagree with the value of the project, you hold your tokens, you're able to sell them, to pass them on, or to do something with it. So it kind of brings more fluidity in being able to come and go. I think the second thing is you want to set up like some very like some strong walls around your community in some sense. Like in our case, like we want everyone to be able to buy the token, but if you want to come and visit, you have to follow our values, and the values are very clearly stated. We have a pink paper which go through like kind of how we want to operate as humans, and we're going to get more and more precise over time in refining those values and how we want to live together, so that if someone comes and breaches them, we can point to them and say, hey, you're not in respect of our agreements that we have collectively put together. And you have the whole history of how those agreements have been created and how they've been approved as a community. So right now, for example, if we wanted to change our values or change the rules of the game, we would have to go through a governance process, and we have a clear definition of who can actually vote in it, and being able to then record those decisions in a public ledger So that, yeah, basically then you have all the rules spelled out. So, I mean, it's not perfect, but I think it's a start in creating a game that's more transparent and easier to play, easier to come in, easier to exit, kind of doing the opposite of a cult that's easy to join but hard to exit, and creating something that's hard to enter but easy to exit, and kind of just bringing more a way of life that's closer to, I think, what maybe digital nomads and like modern citizens are aspiring about.
Yeah, I really like that idea of it. You need to put in the effort, put in the work, put in the time to be a part of this community, so that you can actually have a say over it. Because I think we could mostly agree that those that are putting in that time and effort and that sweat equity into these projects really are kind of deserve to have a say in the direction, more than maybe someone who just tries to come in and purchase a token and doesn't have, doesn't put in the time and the effort to help build and construct and kind of bring that community together in that same fashion. I find that really interesting and very powerful. Um, I did have a question to kind of bring it back to the regeneration side of things a bit more. Was curious about what technology you have used or excited to try, or maybe perhaps would like to see being built to really help bring about a more regenerative paradigm and allow people to tap into nature's abundance without using more extractive methods.
Mm-hmm. I think there's so many technologies that can be applied right now. Like, it's not knowledge that we're lacking to shift into a regenerative civilization. It's more like will and like taking responsibility. And there's an infinite number of things that you can do. I mean, something that gets me really excited is like water retention landscapes. Like restoring water cycles is possibly even more important to climate change than carbon. And it's something that doesn't require like anything advanced. Like there's a project called Ecosystem Restoration Camps. I've been doing it in Saudi Arabia and China and so on. And it's literally just like shifting the landscape a little bit around, moving some rocks around. Someone was asking me last time, and they were like, yeah, but you need a lot of capital, a lot of machines, a lot of money, and so on. And no, like the Saudi Arabia project, they got some locals together, shifted some rocks around in order to retain water when it finally rains. After every few years, you have rains in Saudi Arabia. And because you do that, I mean that you start to retain more water in the soil, you start to see more plants, which then means that you can retain more water and create like this virtuous cycle. And the thing, it's really all about these, like restoring these virtuous cycles. Like the Amazon is dying out. All predictions were saying that it would turn it to savanna, but we're actually seeing that it turned into desert because the Amazon is also a biotic pump and actually drives the rain, and it brings the rain from the ocean. So those mechanisms work like both ways. Like we can create like those regenerative spirals that can have like effect that can ripple out. Another great technology I think is like biochar, and that's literally how the Amazon was created as well, by having people burn wood over millennia, like generation after generation, and accumulating that carbon in the ground. And so now you have what's called terra preta, and this is something that we can do in a much more efficient way now with a bit of technology, and that we can actually extract energy from as well in the process. And this is something that really should be applied on a much larger scale, especially in all the places that are getting more dry, because it increases your soil water retention capacity. It increases how much microbes can live in the soil by creating a lot more real estate for them. So we actually have all of these technologies that are very low tech, that don't really require much besides just shifting a little bit into a regenerative mindset, and that can really plant seeds for a more abundant future. And if we just started to do these two things, like water retention and and also let's do agroforestry systems instead of like monocrop agriculture. If we can just do these things across the planet, like we're gonna have solved probably climate change and all those stuff. But we need to do it now before the virtuous cycles go around and we turn the whole planet into a dust bowl.
Yeah, the project that you mentioned in Saudi Arabia, is that the one that Neil Spackman was on?
Exactly.
That was amazing project. If anybody has not yet watched like the YouTube video that they put out about that project, it's incredible what they did. In the I can't like explain to you the courage that it took for them to turn the water that they were using to like, I guess, artificially try to bring that water in, and then to go from, okay, I think we've done enough here, to turn the water off in the amount of time that it took for the rain to finally come back, and then to see that it flourished, that they had success. It's a beautiful story. I recommend anybody who hasn't checked it out, go check that out. It's amazing. Um, yeah, I'll share the link here shortly. And I'll also share the link to the video in the Discord as well. Kind of talking about that nature of abundance, and something that you had mentioned earlier, the microeconomies. I think like it's like one of the things that people kind of say is maybe lacking from a network state is the sustainable side on in terms of a revenue. Could you maybe explain a little bit more about like tapping into nature's abundance through the regeneration, and then being able to create these different businesses, these microeconomies that can then be exported as goods from the village and from these areas that are being regenerated? Could you maybe talk about that a bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're living in extremely interesting times. I mean, you know, regeneration, I think, is going to prove to be a successful business model, but it does take like 10 years or like 7 years, whatever, to restore an ecosystem. And I think obviously there's way more value in having a living forest around you that provides you with food and with water and with quality air and all of that stuff. I think we're not really setting the financial price on that yet, but I think that will come. But we're also living in an age where remote work has become the norm, like almost overnight when COVID hit. That was something that we were already predicting when we started developing OAS about 6 years ago. And we're kind of sensing into all the upcoming technologies and how that would affect our ability to live closer to nature. And I think the next big thing is going to be like deglobalization. We're going to see like the end of like global trade routes and like manufacturing products to be like with like production steps in like 10 different countries. And I think we're going to see a lot more relocalization of manufacturing. And, you know, through AI and robotics, we will be able to produce goods wherever we want. And we're not going to need those huge industries and huge factories with thousands of workers in it. So I think that's really going to shift the kind of dynamic of what we see as work and play and places to live and so on. And it's going to give more power to the spaces that are actually creating healthy habitats for humans to thrive, and where you can feel creative and we can feel surrounded by inspiring people, and we can be creative, and we can have access to the means of production, whether it's like a co-working space or a lab or maker space, and also a piece of land to grow some vegetables or whatever you want to do. So I think the economy is like kind of everything is aligning towards giving us all the tools to actually do this shift and to kind of end a cycle of urbanization and highly industrialized processes that have been extracting from nature, and really starting to go back to a more local scale. And in that process, I think we're going to be empowering small local communities to take care more of their needs, because what we're going to be exchanging is more technology and things that can fly through the internet, and we're not really going to need so much materials to be shipped across the world in order to fulfill our needs. And yeah, I think that's the opportunity. It's like creating regenerative economies, actually working with the land and the resources around you, limiting your imports and augmenting the things that you export through technology.
Yeah, definitely. Totally agree with that. Does anybody else have any other questions for Sam? I know we're kind of at the top of the hour, or just a bit past. Oh, it looks like Rachel sent one in here. What were some of the components that happened with ease? And for you personally, what was something that happened quick during this journey that surprised you?
Thanks for the question. I don't think anyone ever asked me that. Something that just happened with ease. I think one thing that clicked for me is like, I mean, we're building this like one-way entry into the commons where we're talking about putting the land in there for like multiple generations. And I think there's something that happens in that process, like when you actually realize it in your bodies that, yeah, like that this is just gonna continue for forever or like for a very long time. It just like really shifts your relationship to the nature around you, to how you perceive the environment, to how you kind of interact and so on. And I think I have a very good ability to project myself in the future, and that's probably why I'm like started this project. But basically, like being on the land, like I've just been able to project these ideas and like see how the land would evolve over time. And yeah, I think like the whole like regeneration aspect of it, like sure it's difficult, like you have to learn some things about like growing trees and whatnot, but it also just works, and like you get people to advise you and to do the things, and it just takes time, but it actually works. And yeah, I think that's like something inspiring for everyone, because we need to shift like our time perspective of like just being more anchored to the cycles of nature, and just learning to observe with it. And yeah, I don't know, that's what came up, like that feels somehow easy to like just relax into being in that space. And I think this is what the regeneration is. It's like we need to relax in being with nature and living inside of it, and not like rushing to the next thing all the time.
And maybe a quick follow-up question to that one, that's also a bit personal for you, maybe Sam, is when was and what was your aha moment for regeneration? When did it click? What caused it to click for you?
For regeneration in general, well, I mean, I used to be a digital nomad, and like I realized that I was at the mercy of the market, like of Airbnb, and not having a say in how the spaces that I was staying in were in like a sustainability sense. Like even simple things like recycling. Like if you don't have a recycling bin in the place you're renting, you cannot even choose to do that. And I think like from being in Mexico and seeing the stark contrast between the native forest that you have in the Yucatan jungle and like the shitty development that we're doing in Cancun and Tulum and so on. And it's like just so obvious, like you can see it from satellite happening everywhere. Like, and the process of development, like how we're building civilization, is just repeating all over the world. And I just felt like in Yucatan, it was just like so blatant and so obvious. Like you have this pure, lush jungle, completely untouched. You can walk out there, and then you see how it's being turned into developments, and just like the super degenerative effects of it. And then you start to learn of all the stories of how you have like the guys coming in with the guns and telling the Mayan tribes who actually own the land that they have to sell it to them. And you start to learn about these processes of how real estate development is done. And then you start to learn about how all of these developments are also just dumping all of their black waters into the water table and completely ruining all of the beautiful cenotes. And there's this stark contrast of like the beautiful natures that you can find there and the extremely shitty developments that we're doing as a civilization. Yeah, that really made me angry and made me want to create better ways to being able to enjoy these beautiful places and being able to travel to these places and build roots and feel a sense of belonging and purpose by actually creating spaces that restore nature instead of destroying it.
Well, thank you, Sam, so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Learned an absolute ton. I'm going to be going through this probably multiple times over the next week, trying to digest everything. And I'm sure there's going to be really good stuff in there that I missed and probably didn't catch while we were watching it live here. But yeah, really looking forward to it. Again, just thank you for taking the time to be here with us and share. I don't know if anybody else has any
Yes.
questions, but you can always follow TDF on X. You can always, what's a good way for somebody if they wanted to get a hold of you, maybe had any other questions, Sam?
Yeah, I'll put my email in the chat. I mean, basically, if you want to come visit us in Portugal, we're always looking for volunteers and builders and people to come to all the different events. We're hosting a permaculture design course in November. So if you want to learn about building agroforestry systems and so on, you can join us. And yeah, if you're interested in building a village or like launching this type of project, well, we have a tech platform that you can use, and super open to collaborate and to get more people involved in yeah, building this out.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for joining us today. It's been a real joy. Looking forward to the next stuff that we've got coming up for V DAO. There's going to be a Twitter Spaces in a few weeks with Jasmine Energy around mid-October. There's going to be a whole host of other things. We're going to be at MCon this weekend doing a community food forest planting. Also going to be cleaning up some existing community gardens out there in the heart of Detroit. And yeah, just lots going on. So stay tuned and make sure to join the Discord and yeah, get in contact with Sam if you're interested in what they're working on. All right. Thank you, everybody. Cheers.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
So, and you forgot to mention about the dance floor and the transformation room, which
That's
is a quite
true.
important part of creating this regeneration space, like to have fun along the process. I have the opportunity to enjoy the TDF for a week with my family, and this feeling of celebration and like this community that is building around this beautiful view. It's really energizing and refreshing, facing all the troubles that you are seeing on the news. So it's a very important thing to share this spirit. It really lifts up our energy. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Marcelo, and looking forward to see you again soon.
Bye bye.
Ciao, ciao.